All right, we're back. Evan,
Michael, how
welcome
are you?
back. It's a long time no see since the main stage. Welcome to the feed.
I am so excited to be on the feed.
Well, tell us all about yourself. What do you do for a living, and where do you do it, and what's your background?
So I get to work on food systems, climate change, agricultural technology. I get to do it at the University of Guelph, where I direct something called the Arrell Food Institute.
Fantastic. Now, your background, were you always a food? I think you're a geographer by background in your I don't know, your training, but I can't think of anything more appropriate to agriculture, geography. But talk us a little. Were you always wanting to be academically oriented? Did you do private sector stuff? What's your background like that?
Well, food has been my passion ever since I was young. Got it from my grandfather, farmer, who I worked with, summers, weekends, that sort of thing.
You mentioned that on the stage,
and I mentioned that on the stage.
Fertilizer. Sure.
I also got it through my mother, who is a consummate cook and host. So the convening power of food to bring people together and families and culture and heritage and history, but also then the business and environmental impact of producing that food. That runs through my life in both directions.
Let's talk about Canada and agriculture. You know, we were talking earlier about Canada as potential, and it is today, a superpower in agriculture. And I don't want to exaggerate this, but in some ways, some of those advantages came easy to us. It certainly wasn't easy for the people who came here and started the farms. But, you know, from the land, from the water, from the people, you know, we had a good, fast start. But maybe those assumptions don't hold the same anymore. I know that we're trying to find new people, we've got environmental challenges. How do you assess what needs to happen in the agriculture community to us to be our proper place, continued superpower?
Yeah, well, let's start at the high level and the positive. I mean, we have tremendous abundant resources, land, water, sunlight, all the good things.
Blessed.
We've got a sophisticated food producing sector, a really great food processing sector. We've got a regulatory environment that, despite its challenges, and we like to complain about our regulations, it is the envy of the world. Our infrastructure is pretty good. I mean, hard to get stuff to port, but is generally pretty good, globally speaking. With all that being said, though, the system that we currently have depends on easy trade, free movement of stuff and labor. It requires a productive environment and cheap energy to keep farm input prices down. And all four of those basic assumptions are being eroded. It's not as easy as it was even 5 years ago to move stuff and labor across national borders. We can't rely on climate change. Farm inputs are much more expensive than they used to be. And so there's a moment, I think, right now where we have to reflect on what the needs of the 21st century food system are, because really our food system is built for the assumptions of the 20th century right now.
So there's an old saying about not letting a good crisis go to waste. I've never actually liked that saying because I don't think there's any good crises, but we feel like we're in a bit of a crisis today, at least from a trade perspective. We've got geopolitical forces against us, both from other countries. We've got challenges with very large countries who are very big consumers of agriculture products, but politically we're not getting on so well. What do you think Canada and how should our country and agriculture take advantage of this moment that we're having right now and move forward? Is that your perspective?
It very much is my perspective, Michael. I really do think that this is a moment that Canada, or a sector that Canada can own the podium on. We should be the global leader in agriculture and food, and we're not, unfortunately. I would say that to get there, to realize that potential, to allow us to punch above our weight as opposed to below our weight, we need to do about four things. And they're going to sound quite pedestrian, but that actually gives me hope, because pedestrian things are achievable. It's not like I'm saying we have to invent a quantum computer. We have to just do some fairly pedestrian things. We have to direct funding to do applied research. So there's challenges, or we're currently wondering how to deploy AI or genomic technology into the food system. Well, we need to do the research to actually really develop those tools and those technologies. So there's some applied research that has to be done. We know that far too often Canadian entrepreneurs in the ag food sector either crash out before their businesses become viable, or they move to the States. So we need to do a better job of keeping our entrepreneurs in Canada and giving them a pathway into the market and to scale. and there's lots of things we can do about that. We need to entice young people not only into training in the sector, but also train them in new technologies. That's a vital thing. And we need to streamline our regulatory processes so that we can bring innovations into society faster. 4 broad categories. We can drill into deep sort of details under each of those, but I list those, and I think quite hopefully that these are the things that we can as a country easily achieve. And if we do, we will see greatness, I think, in the sector.
I guess if I ask the question differently, what's holding us back? You know, sometimes interprovincial barriers are called out. We're going to talk about supply management for good or ill, but it feels bigger than that. What is it that holds us back? You know, when I think about the political level, does it get the right amount of focus? Does it get the right amount of funding? You know, what's the difference between where we are today, how we can use the moment we're in now, and to get us to where we should be and could be?
Yeah, well, let's just take a really obvious barrier like capital investment in the space. Ag as a sector of the economy attracts less capital than other sectors of the economy relative to its importance in terms of overall contribution to GDP. And in Canada, lags attracting global ag tech venture capital into Canada. So we're a sector that's underperforming, plus a country that's underperforming in terms of attracting venture capital into this space. We need to have private capital come in here, and so there's a role for government to help de-risk investments in this space that help smooth the pathway so that if a venture capitalist is thinking, what do I bet on? Do I buy a set of condos in Florida, or do I help set up an ag tech funding system in Canada? They have incentives to put their money to work in the sector as opposed to simply buying and selling real estate. And that's a specific example which I'm citing. I'm not going to name, but I'm citing that as a specific example. Yeah. So there's just one example of how we sort of get in our own way in terms of realizing our potential as a country.
You know, I do want to focus on one of those. We heard on the campaign trail recently, I actually like the phrase boots, not suits. In other words, we need more people. And of course, agriculture is both a technologically advanced business, but actually it is a hands-on business, literally. How do we get more people? How do we get more youth into that? Is it funding? How do we make it a more interesting opportunity? Is it just the sum of all the different things you just said? Make it more interesting, capital, allow farmers to pass their farms on in the right way? Talk about that for a bit.
So what you're hitting on here, Michael, is one of the things I am most frustrated with on my day-to-day basis. I mean, the sector, I would argue, is the most innovative, forward-thinking, bleeding edge of technology sector. Quick story, not far from where we're talking right now, a couple of years ago at the Royal Ontario Winter Fair, I was talking to a young robotics engineer, and he trained to go into aerospace, couldn't find a good job in aerospace, but found great jobs in Leamington, figuring out tomato harvesters. And he was like, there's so many cooler opportunities applying robotic technology to tomatoes and greenhouses than there are to figuring out, NASA type problems. So that for me is sort of, talking to that guy sort of stood out for me is we need to do a better job communicating to younger people thinking about what careers they're going to go, that there are not just old MacDonald has a farm kind of jobs in agri-food, but there are tech jobs, programming jobs, front of markets, marketing jobs, front of house jobs, that this is truly moving into the knowledge economy. And not only can you have a great job, University of Guelph likes to brag that there's 4 jobs for every one of our graduates. So not only are you going to walk into a great job, you're also going to be on part of that moral mission to feed the planet, feed humanity without destroying the planet.
It ticks a lot of boxes.
It ticks so many boxes. Yeah. So I spend a lot of my time talking to young people to try to dial up the excitement for working in the sector. And I think we'll get there, but we're not there yet. People still want to do NASA, not greenhouses, and I don't understand why.
Well, let's talk about all the different stakeholders that can contribute to that and other things. We're here at the Suppliers Summit. Lots of thousands, literally, of amazing vendors, suppliers. We've got grocers, of course, in the room. What can they do together as a community to advance the goals and advance the agriculture community in this country?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things, and the first is, and I'll sort of back out of your question and then I'll come at it. The first is to tell your listeners about a new program we're launching right now. So a group of us, I say us being post-secondaries, but also some northern and Indigenous communities as well, have just received funding from the federal government to create a training platform to attract young entrepreneurs into the space. And we're going to have training, we're going to have mentoring, and we're going to have like collision events, design jams, and hackathons to really try to create an ecosystem of innovation for ag food. The program is called Sustainable Food Systems for Canada, SF4C, and we're going to launch in the fall. What I would love your listeners to think about is what challenges do you have that could be solved by a group of interdisciplinary students? And then reach out to me, Evan Fraser, University of Guelph, because we are going to be constructing challenges that hopefully are responding to industry and community needs as we roll out Sustainable Food Systems for Canada. So my first thing, and it's a way of answering your question, is what can people do? Well, think about what sort of challenges your organization has, and would you be willing to sponsor a challenge with us, and then therefore take on some students to solve that challenge in a sort of a group co-op sort of model. Lots more to say about that, but watch this space, Sustainable Food Systems for Canada, Evan Fraser, University of Guelph. The other thing I'd say to your listeners is I think there is a real opportunity for our country to double down on our already emerging and strong reputation of being a trusted supplier of safe and sustainable food. And we've got very, very good food safety protocols amongst the best in the world.
I think we have a good international brand.
We have a great international brand. It's a pre-competitive brand, so it's not something that we're jostling for market share. It's Canada jostling for market share internationally. It's not within our ecosystem. And I think that we need to, as a sector, agree on some good sustainability benchmarks, some good food safety benchmarks, some good pre-competitive branding tools, and get out in front of the conversation, specifically to the Europeans, but also the Asian consumers, to make sure that Canadian food is unequivocally seen and unequivocally demonstrated to be safe and sustainable. And if we can have that trust, we'll be able to do good things.
And you see the opportunity for lots of partnerships between brands, grocers, and government and education all together. That's pretty fertile ground. Right?
Absolutely. And in my role as a director of Arrow Food Institute, one of the things I like to do the most is bring these communities together to sort of establish where the overlap is and the synergies are, and then ultimately lobby for change based on those overlaps.
Last question for you, and I'm going to take a different tack to switch gears a little bit. Supply management comes up as a bit of an irritant globally. I mean, between the U.S. and New Zealand and the UK with Canada. Lots of advantages to supply management. We're not going to debate it here on this podcast because we don't have 3 or 4 hours. But there's certainly pros and there's cons. Many would call or say there's probably opportunity for enhancements or changes or modifications. First of all, do you agree there's opportunity to make it better? And what's your perspective on the future of the SM5?
So such a good topic, and I thoroughly agree that supply management has been a real benefit in many regards for our country in terms of keeping a reasonable scale of dairy and chicken production that hasn't gone sort of to the mega-sized farms that, say, you see in California, for instance. And I'm really
domestic food security as well.
And we have domestic food security.
Right.
We, of course, also have barriers for young people to enter the market. And my observation is that perhaps the sector, as a result of supply management, doesn't lean into potentially disruptive innovations as much as it could. And when you think of something like plant-based proteins or cellular meat or things, these new disruptive technologies that are coming along, we need to figure out, as a matter of some urgency, how we can be both innovative and incorporate those within the existing system. So for the supply managed commodities listening to this podcast, I would encourage you to think about where you can find synergies with the disruptive new technologies and lean into the change, not be afraid about it.
Fantastic. Well, Evan, it's been a real treat to sit down with you and have a longer conversation. I love talking about ag. I can't think of a better venue to do it than here on the feed. So thanks once again for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks, Michael.
Great luck with that new program. It sounds amazing. And what was your email again so people get in touch?
Evan Fraser is my name, and then my last name and my first initials, so FRASERE at uoguelph.ca.
All right, fantastic.
Thanks, Michael.
Again for joining us, and safe travels.
Bye now.